If you want to cut weeks off your grow and still pull a fat harvest, the Sea of Green method might be your new best friend. Come on, let's talk about it. But before we do, today's video is brought to you by Real Growers Recharge. If you want stronger, healthier plants, if you want bigger roots for better fruits, you gotta check out Real Growers Recharge. It's like an instant compost tea that holds more nutrients at your root zone, breaks those nutrients down, and makes them more plant available, getting more of your nutrients into your plants. Find out more about Recharge over at realgrowers.com. And while you're there, use coupon code Scotty420 to get 20% off your first order. Now let's get back to the show. Come on, High C, let's get in there. You want to grow a Sea of Green, man?
Maybe. I think it might depend on where I live.
Yeah, check your legality on this one. Sea of Green is a lot of little plants that we are not vegging, or we're going to veg them for maybe a week, immediately click them back. We're trying to just grow basically one central bud, basically, and just have them right next to each other. Put it this way, I would use either a 6-inch Rockwool cube. They have these Hugo blocks, they're called. It's 6 inches by 6 inches by 6 inches. Or you can use a 1-gallon container, which is about a 6-inch pot. But the idea is you're taking these and jamming them right next to each other. You'll either use drippers or a flood and drain table. And there's no veg. Or if there's veg, there's a 5 or 7 day veg to acclimate them.
So instead of growing 3 or 4 big plants, I'm growing 20, 30 really small plants.
Yeah. I'm thinking maybe 1 per square foot, somewhere around there. Maybe a little bit tighter, but that's about as, think about it. We're growing a plant that's that big, and then we're just going to grow them right next to each other. Think about what you're doing. The 18-hour veg cycle that cost us 50% more in electricity to run, you're skipping that. You're going right from that just into your 12-12 cycle. Remember, it takes these plants a little bit to figure out they're in flowering, a week, 10 days. In that time, they've grown to the point where they're big enough to where you can flower them up. If it's grown in 10 days because you've got an intense setup and it's grown to be something this big, man, if you have enough of those, A, you're going to get a great yield because you're growing nothing but tops. But B, you shaved off your veg time. Now, instead of 30 days in veg and 60 days in bloom for a total of 3 months, you skipped that veg stage and you went right to bloom from the solo cup. And man, you've got 2 months. Think about that. That's 6 harvests instead of 4. It's a big deal.
Okay, so you mentioned this is going to be mostly tops. So you're not topping your plants. You're not cutting off that apical
meristem. It depends. For the most part, I leave mine going. If I'm doing Sea of Green, I am not cutting anything. I'm just growing that giant apical meristem, maybe a couple little buds on the side, but that's really what I'm harvesting. So it's a great way to get nothing but tops. Hey, I would be remiss if I did not say strain matters. You don't want to get some leggy sativa for this. You want a short, fat, probably pretty fast flowering indica. So think about, or, indica dominant hybrid, but you don't want something big and lanky. You want something that's short and stocky.
Again, we always talk about make sure that you're keeping your strain in mind and make it match to your growth style.
6 different continents, all right? These grow all around the world. Cannabis does on 6 different continents. They don't grow the same way.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that you should keep in mind while you're prepping for Sea of Green growing. Sure.
The first thing is you're going to need a lot of plants, so take a lot of cuttings. Get yourself a couple of extra clone domes. And just remember, you're going to be putting, 1 plant per square foot is pretty aggressive. So just make sure you got that many clones.
Okay, so I've got a bunch of cuts. I've got them in my clone dome.
Sure.
What's going to be different from the traditional way of growing from this point forward?
You're not growing big plants. You're not going to veg these things for very long. You might put them, sometimes you go from a clone to a solo cup. If I was doing it, I would go from a clone to a 1-gallon container, and that would be my finishing container. So I'm going to go from my clone dome, maybe put them in the 1-gallon container for a week in order to get them acclimated. and then they go right in the bloom. And in bloom, they're gonna take them another week or so until they figure out that they're in bloom. They do stretch in bloom, and you get yourself maybe an 18-inch tall plant with a giant central cola, nothing but tops around it, and you get great quality. And think about how much time you shaved off your veg. You know, you can also veg these things in another room. Think about how close you can pack a bunch of 1 gallons together. And then once you put those on your flood and drain table or your flowering table, man, you've just shaved significant amounts of time off your grow. A third, if you were able to veg those things in your little clone area while finishing up flowering.
So 10 days in the clone dome, maybe a week under veg light, and then immediately into bloom.
Yes. Yep, something like that. Yeah, of course, it's going to vary about how intense your lights are, how much CO2 you have, but the idea is a very short veg, just clone dome into the small containers. I've seen this a lot of times with, they call them Hugo blocks. It's a 6-inch by 6-inch by 6-inch rock wool block, and they'll either use flood and drain or cyclical irrigation, with the dripper. But that is the way that I've seen it done. And don't forget, at that point, you're also able to do a lot of dry back. Dry back is going from wet to dry. The roots expand when you do dry backs. They go looking for water. So even just having such a small container with a decent sized plant on there, it goes from wet to dry a lot of times 12, 16 times a day. That's high performance.
That was the other thing too, is you were telling me in order to pull this off, you do have to be in there watering or have a drip system pretty frequently watering.
Yeah, I've done this before. What is the statute of limitations for plant count? I've done this before, and I found the best thing is a flood and drain table, because drippers do get clogged. It's hard to get to a dripper in the middle of your grow. My big beef with a flood and drain table is most of the time you're flooding the area where there's no plants, so it takes a ton of water. In this case, you've got plants everywhere. It's 50% plants in there, so a flood and drain table is pretty efficient. And if you are making a flood and drain table, don't forget about wicking. You don't have to flood to the top of the cube. You can have a 1/2 inch of water in a rock wool cube and it will wick up. So a flood and drain table is not hard to make and doesn't need a giant reservoir.
Okay, and with this system, when I've seen people do it,
right,
it seems like they have a pretty even canopy to keep the light hitting the plants all pretty evenly. What are some tips for that?
Pick the right strain, I would say, is big, because you really don't want to be trimming these things. You want to let this, they call it the apical meristem, the apex, that one giant bud in the center. That's really what we're cultivating here.
Okay, so this probably wouldn't work if I'm trying to grow a bunch of different genetics all in the same grow?
Yeah, I think this is great for, you find a short, fat indica, fast flowering indica, and I really think that's best because you don't want them all growing into each other. We're not scrogging. We're not going to be putting a net on top of this. These should be compact enough to stand up on their own. You've got one, 18-inch bud that is, the apical meristem. It's the central cola, and then there's another one 6 or 8 inches, 8 inches away from it. So that's really what we're trying to do. So just short, compact plants. A lot of indica dominant stuff. That's what we want to look for.
All right, so besides just the cutting off 3 weeks of veg, what are some of the other reasons that people like this method of growing?
All right, well, there's 2 major advantages. First off, if we're taking nothing but tops, then theoretically, we've done it right. We should have great quality weed, man. There should be not those little popcorn buds in the bottom. It should be just all high quality. People should be really excited from the first to the last bag. So that would be the first thing. And then yield. I mean, you are going to get more. Not only is it going to be better quality, but you are going to get significantly more. And you're shaving, a third of the time off your entire grow cycle. So, like I said, it's the difference between 4 harvests and 6 harvests a year. And you're going to get more. There is no more productive way to grow than the Dutch table method. You yield like crazy. Problem is plant count. For commercial growers, they're using this like crazy. They're not spending a bunch of time. If you ever look on the internet, they're not spending a bunch of time growing trees. They are just taking small plants, flowering them up, and think about what happens when you're young compared to when you're old. You're resilient, right? As a teenager, you can't break them. When we talk about the big older plant, they're only meant to grow in nature for a certain amount of time. So by flowering up these young plants, you get these young bucks, these really hardy plants and they just yield. They grow quickly, they yield, they're strong. I don't know, what else do we need? That's awesome, right? But keep in mind, if you are in a state that cares about plant count, this is big, all right? Be very careful. The punishments go by how many plants you have. Over 99 plants, at least back in my day, it was federal. You want to avoid that stuff. So just play by the rules or be smart. The reason I bring this up is because there's some states that have been really intelligent and they have a canopy size is how they made their laws. So if you want 20 small plants in a 4x4 tent or 4 big ones, it doesn't matter. That's an intelligent law. Unfortunately, they're not all written like that right now. Hey, but that is just how I do it when I'm growing Sea of Green. But did I miss something? Come on, let me know in the comments. If you dug this video, come on, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this video with another grower you know, and check out the other couple of videos YouTube's recommend, and we hope you'll dig them.